Hi, class. My name is Lennox Cowan. I wanted to present to you my leadership philosophy. It's entitled Nuru, the light that illuminates a room. The title comes from the Swahili name that I was given when I studied abroad in Kenya in 2011. I definitely believe that a leader is someone who can step into a space, enlighten that space, bring new life to that space, to then better that space, better that atmosphere. So, as a leader in education, my goal is to definitely enlighten not only the philosophies and practices in education, but to also improve those practices, particularly as it pertains to students of color, specifically African American Black students. Um, I don't see myself as a leader who will be mundane or who will stick with the status quo, but more so be a leader who's very bold, who doesn't mind taking risks, and who doesn't mind, going against the grain when it comes to education. I want to start off with a quote by W.E.B. Du Bois, which states, when sticks and stones and beasts form the sole environment of a people, the attitude is ever one of determined opposition to and conquest of natural forces. But when to earth and brute is added an environment of men and ideas, then the attitude of the imprisoned group may take three main forms: a feeling of revolt and revenge, an attempt to adjust all thought and action to the will of the greater group, or finally, a determined attempt at self-development, self-realization, in spite of environing this discouragement and prejudice. What this quote means to me is that as a man of African descent, I have a responsibility to make sure that I one am okay with the way in which I'm going to have to be a leader to make sure that the results are in favor of marginalized people. And what that means is that um, I have to be okay with sometimes being reprimanded, sometimes getting in trouble, quote unquote, um, as a leader to get the best results that's going to propel black students in education. I also have to be aware of the fact that to move forward, though, I'm going to have to make sure that I adjust my thinking, make sure that I am able to encourage the larger group, my students, my faculty, so that we all can move towards a greater result within black education. But then lastly, um, understand that there is there is a level of discouragement that will occur, especially as a black man in America leading in education. You know, if and this discouragement comes in, if I follow the rules too much, or if I am constantly thinking about what others will think about my leadership style, then I can become insecure. And what that leads to is that leads to ineffective teaching style. If I try to if I try to maintain the capitalistic and hegemonic um, environments that have permeated schools for so long, will I get the results that I'm really seeking as a leader? Or will I have to go ahead and not discourage myself? Um, will I have to go ahead and not participate in those prejudices to then make sure that my students are not only developing themselves, but to make sure that I'm developing myself as a leader as well? That quote by Du Bois has resonated with me throughout my leadership experiences. While I am fairly young, I have had several leadership experiences, including being a resident director at the University of Illinois Chicago, being a Hugh O'Brien Youth Leadership Fireside Facilitator, which basically meant I took the time to volunteer one weekend to lead a group of adult facilitators and ensuring that a group of 50 students or so, 50 high school sophomores, were able to develop a innovative community project that would solve a issue in their community. But this project had to be done, had to be completed with the emphasis of leadership through service, meaning that this project, was not for any profit towards the organizer or to the planners, but was a fundraiser or was some kind of service project that would benefit something or someone else. I was a Algebra 1 course team leader and curriculum developer, as well as a Kappa Delta Pi chapter president when I was at Howard University in undergrad. Some of the lessons that I've taken from this course, they're very broad lessons, and I say that because I had the unique experience of being an Afro American Studies major as well as a math major while I was at Howard. So a lot of the um, more detailed social issues I was able to discuss in undergrad, and I was able to really like start to combat and grapple with. So those didn't necessarily come as a shock or like um, ways to navigate through those spaces that we talked about or discussed in our case studies weren't a shock to me, but they were more so. But for me, they taught me to gain um, bigger picture or greater lessons from those case studies. So the first lesson that I gained from the first case study was to always have a mentor. And I say that because I think about Miss Williams, Sarah Williams' case, and how she was this new principal. She had this new situation in this new school, and she came in thinking that she was going to be able to use her, um, she was going to be able to use her notions of through life to get her through to lead in this black space. And had she not had a mentor, she probably would have not been able to navigate as a leader and as an administrator. And having a leader and administrator, I mean, having a mentor is so important because you then get to discuss with someone the issues that Hudley raised in her articles, the issues of going into school spaces or educational spaces with this idea that education is the gateway for this is the gateway to freedom for middle class families. Like that is not necessarily the case at all. That's very evident in black education and black students in education, meaning black students can go through education systems, you know, just like everybody else, but that doesn't mean they're going to succeed at the same rate as anybody else. So, but having a mentor will be able to like give you a preview or talk to you about that before you enter that space ignorantly, as well as I think Haberman it doesn't necessarily talk about having a mentor per se, but when he talks about the pedagogy of poverty, um, if you don't have a mentor who's worked in urban settings before, who's worked with black students before, when you walk into an educational space, you might go in using the same exact practices that Haberman frowns upon, which my mentors have frowned upon. If I did not have mentors who were grounded in African-centered teaching, who had experiences in black schools, I would have gone into my first couple of years of teaching thinking that I needed to use robotic and rote memorization practices to teach my students in these quote-unquote low-achieving schools versus having my students go through life or go through my class with an inquiry-based and discovery-based mindset and learning. So definitely having a mentor was one of the takeaways that I gained from this course. As well as I also noticed that having a mentor is important when we're doing an interview with a school leader. In that, when you have a mentor, you're able to gain personal insight, first-hand accounts about how to navigate the space of a school as a leader. Going through the interview process taught me that you should definitely always have somebody there who will be able to teach you that you're not alone in this space, and that they should be able to teach you that this space is not something to take for granted. Teaching students and leading teachers is not something that um, somebody should be embarking on alone. You should definitely always have somebody there who's going to hold you accountable, who's gone through the experience before. The second lesson that I got from this course was to use your privilege and social stance to be bold. And that was specifically from the second case study, when Mr. Menzino had the opportunity to use not only his privilege as somebody who fit into the dominant community, but his privilege as someone who was respected within the dominant community to really be bold with the changes that needed to happen in the school to gain better results. As a black man, I do have a certain level of privilege, and as a STEM teacher, I have a certain level of privilege that comes with that. And so, for me, because I have these privileges, I'm going to use those privileges to take a stance, to stand by that stance, as well as to understand that the feelings or the notions that I have about education and black education are not going to always be agreed upon. They're not going to always be taken um, in agreement in agreement with the majority. But I have to be okay with that, and I have to be okay with knowing that I'm not going to satisfy everybody. But as long as I'm doing right by the kids and by my teachers, I think that that's the most important lesson, and that's the most important thing in order to gain the best results as a leader within a school and education setting. And then lastly, um, the last lesson that I gained from this course was to listen first and lead second. And that came from the third case study. And I think about John Matthews, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. I think about his experience as a principal walking into his rural school, coming from the Midwest, and how he stepped into this space. And I'm not saying that he did not listen first, but what I am saying is that he did not listen acutely enough at first to gain insight into the school's culture, to understand how he was going to navigate through that culture, to then change that culture to being more receptive of the indigenous students and people who worked and attended the school burn month. And so what that means is it means going into a space and understanding your social consciousness, which is what Dorinda Carter speaks on in her TED talk. She talked about how if we are not aware, if we don't make students aware of their social consciousness and where they stand in society, um, then we're doing them a disservice. And as a leader, if I don't, one, make myself aware of my social consciousness, make myself aware of um, who I am as a person and where I stand as a person, then I won't be able to teach my teachers to do the same thing, and I definitely won't be able to teach my students to do the same thing. Which means, like Carter said, you have to perform critical self-reflection at all times. And so when you listen first, what happens is you're able to be aware of your convictions that you may feel when somebody is telling you um, the truth. When we listen to respond or listen to lead, we shut off what we're supposed to be hearing to be convicted. So then we can't fix the problem because we didn't really receive the problem in the first place. But when we listen first, we are able to really take into account what the problem is that we're facing and what the problem is internally that we're facing to then address that as a leader moving forward. So the three lessons that I learned again are to always have a mentor, use your privilege and social stance to be bold, and to listen first and then lead second. Lastly, through all this experience in this class and my experience through life, I have learned that the meaning of leadership is to one, encourage and develop others to solve problems in the world. What that means is, and I use Paulo Freire as a inspiration for this. Paulo Freire has a really bold statement about inconclusiveness and how human beings um, need to view inconclusiveness in two ways. Human beings need to, one, understand that um, Understand that we are inconclusive. We live in a state of inconclusiveness, meaning we are constantly asking questions. We are constantly asking questions to solve problems, but we also, as human beings, will never come to a state where we have solved every problem that we encounter, which is why we're human beings. As well as he also states that human beings need to be aware of their awareness and consciousness of this inconclusiveness. Meaning, it's one thing to know, it's one thing to be inconclusive, it's one thing to be inquisitive, to ask questions and to answer those questions. It's another thing to be aware as a human being that at the end of the day, we will never come to a a space or a state where all of our questions are answered for any problem that we see fit in the world. So, as a leader, my goal is to make sure that I encourage my teachers, students, and just others to be ready to solve the problems in the world and to never stop solving problems. Just because you feel like, quote unquote, your work is done doesn't mean the work is done. How do you encourage others to further that work, to continue to answer the more detailed questions that you maybe couldn't get to once your time on this earth is complete? And with my students, is, currently in the classroom, it's about how do they expand their mind to continue exploring the math versus just looking at the math that I hand them on a piece of paper, or in a project. But how do you go beyond what I hand you to learn even more about the math so that you are uh, more skilled than what you could have ever imagined? And the same is for teachers. Don't come to the conclusion as a teacher that your job is done because you had a successful year of test scores. No, there are so many other problems that you could be solving, that you need to start to ask yourself about. And if you're not asking yourself these questions, then yeah, you have good test scores consistently every year, but what else are you doing to solve the problems in education? Being a leader also means to handle situations, challenging situations, with humility and confidence. For me, um, you know, being a leader is the ability to navigate through different spaces and to delegate, um, others to navigate through different spaces. But you can't do that if you're not willing to humble yourself, meaning you can't do that if you're not willing to listen and to learn from others. Just because you are in a leadership position doesn't mean that your quote unquote subordinates can't teach you something, and vice versa. So, even as a teacher to this day, I am constantly willing to learn from my students. My students teach me new math concepts and new math skills and new math practices every single day. And I'm this person with a degree, right? But I also understand that I'm a student too, because I am a human being. I am my student's teacher, but I'm also my student's student, and vice versa for them. They teach me things, but I also teach them things. And as a leader, I don't think that should stop. As a leader, I don't think that I should stop learning from my students and my teachers just because I'm a leader in the school. That doesn't mean that stops. That means that actually should intensify. I should be learning even more because I am in a space where I'm interacting with more human beings as the day goes on, right? In the classroom, I'm only interacting with 150 students a day. As a leader, I am leading an entire school, which means that I should be interacting with a couple hundred students each day to ensure that I'm learning from them and they're learning from me. But also handling these situations with confidence. If you go into the situations, with insecurities, you may not get the best results because you are questioning so much. You're questioning everything that you're doing rather than being secure about what you know is right and what you know you should be doing to solve the problems and handle the situation. Um, I had a situation personally where I did become insecure and I did not handle the situation as I knew I should have. So it led me to not gaining the results that I should have gained. So the meaning of leadership for me, again, means to handle challenging situations with humility and confidence. And then lastly, to be a leader means to follow when necessary, but know how to and when to take risks. And what I mean by that is, um, you know, you have to be able to take risks. You have to be able to take risks, and you have to be able to know when to take risks. And what I mean by that is, um, you know, you have to be able to take risks, and you have to be able to know when to take risks. And what I mean by that is, um, you know, you have to be able to take risks, and you have to be able to know when to take risks. And what I mean by that is, as a leader within the school system, I understand that I'm going to always have somebody who's over me, somebody who's always supervising me. So that's okay. I'll follow them when I need to. But also understanding that to gain the best results for the students that I want to serve, which is specifically black students, I can't be afraid to take risks when I need to take risks. And I can't be afraid to understand how those risks will have certain implications and how those implications will affect the results that my students and teachers uh, will encounter in the future. And so what that means is that, if I'm not constantly aware of what I'm trying to do as a leader, meaning I'm not aware of the fact that I have a supervisor that I have to pay attention to, that I have to um, adhere to. But I need to also be aware that if there's a problem that needs to be solved, um, and the adherence to my supervisor doesn't necessarily work to solve that problem, I got to be willing to take that risk to not necessarily adhere to what my supervisor wants anymore, but to take the risk to actually get the job, to solve the problem using some very creative means and methods to get the job done. So to be a leader means to encourage and develop others, to solve problems in the world, to handle challenging situations with humility and confidence, and to follow when necessary, but to know how to and when to take risk as a leader. This class has taught me a tremendous amount in regards to reflection, in regards to introspection as a leader. It has taught me a great deal of paying attention to the world around us, and also being aware that there are so many students in the country who are facing the same problems within the education system, meaning they are marginalized, they are not given the right resources, and they simply are not being challenged or educated in a way that would benefit them. And so, this is not just an urban or black issue, this is an issue around the country. But as a leader, I need to understand that my focus will be on black children specifically, um, but also recognizing that there are black students who are in rural, urban, and suburban situations who are deeply affected by the marginalization every day. I want to thank you for listening to my presentation. Hope you have a great break. Thank you again.